Well, hello all you wonderful people out there in YouTube land, and welcome to this HO scale locomotive review. This is actually a locomotive that you guys have seen on the channel running around the railroad, and even though you have seen it running in its intended purpose for this product review, we're going to use it for the review portion of this, pulling a test train of freight cars. So, without further ado, as you can tell, it is a older Athearn blue box locomotive. So we will tip the box over, lift the lid off, and there you see it, the FP7A, decorated for the mighty Southern Pacific in the daylight scheme. Now, if you are new to the hobby, Athearn has been around for a long time, and they have made quality locomotives pretty much the entire time they have been in the model train hobby industry. This, when I procured it, was a DC locomotive. Someone, the previous owner, had went through the trouble of installing a motherboard with an 8-pin plug, and this engine does actually have a Bachmann 2-function decoder that I had an 8-pin plug installed on and installed it myself. Had a friend of mine at the Texas Model Railroad Club, Mr. David Nugent. He's the one that actually did the programming for me, since I don't have the stuff to do that. And so this is a Athearn blue box locomotive, a Southern Pacific FP7 with a dual function Bachmann 8-pin plug and play decoder. So, to get this engine out of the box, we do just untwist the twist tie here that holds it in place, and you can see there it just comes out nice and easily. Put the box away, well, at least out of the way, and let's take a more in-depth look at this locomotive. The era in which this locomotive was first manufactured and built new, it would have shipped with horn hook couplers, which are these hideous things right here. They do not look like real couplers at all. They are an operational nightmare. Once you get them together, they are not that easy to get apart. So if your main focus is running trains and you don't want them uncoupling, horn hook couplers are a great option. If you actually want to focus on realistic operation in the way of switching and, picking up cars, setting out cars at an industry, horn hook couplers are trash. Add to that, they look like trash. They don't look like real couplers. They look like grotesque claws, other things I can't say on a family-friendly channel. So, that's what it came with, and thankfully the industry has gotten away from those hideous things, and the previous owner from whom I received this actually installed Katie couplers. The magnetic uncoupling pin on this coupler hung too low, so I had to nip it off. I actually had to swap out this coupler for a offset coupler, an underset coupler, that way it would match up with coupler height on, it would match up better. Otherwise the coupler was just hanging too low. This one is a center set coupler, so the knuckle and body of the coupler is actually set, dead center on the shaft of the drawbar of the coupler. As you can see here, I had to bend this one way up so it wouldn't snag on anything, because it was hitting on the crossing in the siding, and it would occasionally trip on the rails of the switch. So had to bend it up. All I used was just regular needle nose pliers and very gently just torque that thing up so it would have sufficient clearance. I probably over torqued it, but hey, it doesn't hit on anything anymore. As you can see, the trucks do not have the modeler installed brake pistons, but that's okay. You have all of the other appropriate details present. You got the brake shoes, you got the journal bearings, you got the leaf springs, everything else is there as it should be. The paint on this engine, even though this is an older engine, is very nicely done. There's very nice separation between the black of the roof, the silver pinstriping, the silver on the cast-on grills here, the silver and the orange. Also, you even have the silver, trim highlighting on the deck plates here, or whatever you want to call them, for the ladder. The ladder here is cast onto the body in the appropriate spots. And you have all this cast-on grill detailing here, and you have the portholes with window glazing. The cab does not have window glazing. This is a solid plastic piece that's part of the body, and actually no, that is window glazing. It's just very dark black plastic. You have the emergency fuel shutoff here, you have the fuel cap here, and cast on to the skirting you have the sight glass for the fuel tank here. This is a water tank for the steam generator, which on the prototype would be back here, which the appropriate vent and stack details are here for the steam generator, which we'll take a look at. The early era of dieselization and all the way into the early phases of the second generation of diesels, passenger cars were heated and air conditioned and powered with steam power. So that was how they ran everything in the passenger cars, was connected to with steam lines connected to the locomotive. Looking at the front of the engine, you can see this very nicely done Southern Pacific Sunset logo, Southern Pacific lines, very nicely done. The pinstriping, the paint is all very nicely done. You have this 7035 on the number boards and painted underneath the headlight. You also have these cast-on grills here, nice chrome trim here. The pilot is one solid piece. You have these little steps here on the pilot on both sides. There is some slight cracking here, but as I said, this is an older locomotive and I did get it used. You can see these single chime air horns, which are prototypically correct. We'll look at the rear of the engine real quick. You can see the ribbing on the rear of the locomotive. You can see these lines here. The MU hose connections. Sans the hoses, of course. And you have a cast-on door with window glazing here. Now, looking at the roof of this locomotive, you will see that, at least to my eye, all of the appropriate detailing is there to duplicate the engine. Now, Athearn in this time frame was not down to the nitty-gritty, every last bolt and nut detail, road specific, era specific, model specific. They, like every other model railroad manufacturer in that time frame, they would generate a close enough approximation, kind of a middle ground between every railroad that had that specific locomotive model. So a Northern Pacific or a Union Pacific or Santa Fe FP7 is going to have pretty much all the same detailing along the top of the cab and along the body and everything else as this Southern Pacific FP7A. Now, I'm sure there's details on here that Southern Pacific had, Santa Fe didn't. I'm sure there's details on here that Northern Pacific had, Southern Pacific didn't. That's fine. I personally don't get that far into it as far as, well, Southern Pacific had 3 vent fans and not 4. I don't care. The model looks good, it runs good, and for this time frame anyway, you can see there is actually a very good amount of detail. You have the rivets along each of these panels here on the roof. As I said, you have all the appropriate detailing, or at least a close enough approximation for the steam generator here, the exhaust stack, the air intake, the vent, all that fun stuff. You have all these cooling fans, the dynamic brake grid, you have the 2 exhaust stacks, and you also have several lift rings that are cast on to the body of the locomotive. So overall, this is a great locomotive. One caveat with this specific locomotive, if I can find it, this axle here, the second axle on the lead truck, is effectively an idler axle because the previous owner had issues with cracked axles, split axles, and he removed the drive gear to this axle here. So this engine, as delivered from the factory, would have had, should have had, 8-wheel drive and full 8-wheel electrical pickup. Now it does still have the full 8-wheel electrical pickup, but it only has 6-wheel drive versus 8 because the drive gear that connects this axle to the motor is missing. It was a band-aid workaround to deal with split axles. I have changed out all the axles on this locomotive, so whenever I can get around to it, I decide to get around to it, I can reinstall that missing gear and the engine will have full 8-wheel drive again. If you've been watching the channel for a while, you know that this engine is intended to pull the Stars Hollow Vintage Railroad excursion train. So there really isn't an operational necessity to reinstall that gear because the most this guy is going to pull is a 5-car excursion train around this railroad. Now, given that it's run on this railroad, you already know that it has an 18-inch radius minimum operating curvature rating, I guess you could say. So this guy, if you find one of these old blue box Athearn FP7As or the FP7Bs at a train show or on eBay or resale shop or wherever, and you have a railroad with an 18-inch radius on main line or siding or anywhere, you're not stuck out. You can run this guy, and it's actually a very good runner. Now, I will say that it is a very finicky locomotive with regard to dirty track. Nothing a Keep Alive won't solve, but that I haven't gotten around to. I have more pressing matters to deal with before I get around to Keep Alives, but overall a good engine. So we are going to run this thing. We'll start it up forward and backward just so y'all can see how smooth it starts in both DCC and DC, and then we'll run it around the railroad in DCC mode. So there's forward. To get the engine moving, powering up the decoder and whatnot, I have to get it about a 1/3 throttle. And there's that dirty track I was talking about. So you can see, nice, quiet, smooth locomotive. Alright, now for the DCC version. Starting off and forward. And reverse.